Welcome to Plastic Model Mojo, a podcast dedicated to scale modeling, as well as the news and events around the hobby. Let's join Mike and Kentucky Dave as they strive to be informative, entertaining, and help you keep your modeling mojo alive.
Episode 108, Dave.
Yes, absolutely.
We've pushed through January. The temperature is breaking finally.
Yeah.
Kind of reminded me of last Christmas.
Yes. Although last Christmas, this happened for like a day or two.
Yeah, it's like 2 days. Now it's been like a week.
I cannot remember a week of single digit lows. It's been pretty freaking miserable.
Well, by Wednesday, it's going to be 60 and raining, so.
I'll take that deal any day of the week and twice on Sunday.
Well, Dave, weather silliness aside, we are back again, and we've had a couple weeks here to get into some trouble. What's been up in your model sphere, my friend?
This and that. It has not been as organized as I'd like. You would have thought with a week of sub-zero temperatures that I'd have been at the bench and making great modeling progress, but there wasn't as much of that. We'll talk about that at the halftime report. But I have been doing little things here and there, placing a VMS order, getting some model-related reading done, interacting with a bunch of folks here and there on different topics. Not as organized as my model sphere normally would be, but not bad. Not bad. It feels all positive. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, I've been trying to get caught up on podcasts. You know, a lot of folks kind of took a break over the holidays. That gave me a chance to pick up a few there.
Yeah.
Well, Scott and company over at the Triple P took a pretty long holiday break, and that's over now. They dropped a new one. And they're talking about dry brushing. It's one of their chosen topics, right?
Right. Wait, is this some new technique that has just come along?
Well, they talk about how it's kind of went away for a lot of people, for probably the majority of the modeling community, especially in armor modeling, right?
Right.
I think that'd be true. But they go around the horn, and they all make some good points about the relevance of the technique in a variety of situations, right?
Right.
Which it is. In fact, our guest said something about it, I believe, but we'll get to that later. But they missed, in my opinion, a key point about why it fell out of favor.
Which was?
That a certain scale model rock star panned it as a general weathering technique, as more than once across several forms of media, as unrealistic. I think I've seen it declared, and lazy. I believe I've seen it called that once.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I find the humor in this resurgence, if you will, this technique, and all the products being pushed along with this resurgence.
Are you saying that the two might somehow be related by the individual involved?
We'll leave it to the listener to come to their own conclusions. But basically, in my opinion, we were told it sucked by the avant-garde, and now they're selling it back to us. Genius. That's just genius, man.
Well, genius is maybe one word for it from a business sense. Maybe from a modeling sense, it gives us the cautionary tale that if a technique is working for you in certain circumstances, just because somebody else poo-poos it doesn't mean you should change what you're doing or give up what you're doing if it's working.
I don't think the old 3-step recipe for finishing armor models is ever going to come back, which is probably fine.
Oh, yeah. We have advanced. There's no question. But that doesn't mean the technique that was being used was completely invalid.
Right. And they make those points. And you know, I'm being corny here. I don't really give a rip one way or the other. But the dry brush brushes and paints that are saturating the market of the last couple years, I personally take a lot of humor in it, because I remember it wasn't all that long ago that it was persona non grata.
Yeah.
Well, that's my model sphere.
given that it's the middle of winter and we're just coming off a 1 week really cold snap, I would hope that you have a modeling fluid to hand.
That'd be correct. A correct assumption, or a wish fulfilled, maybe.
All right. What do you have?
I've got Knob Creek Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey.
Oh, good choice. Good choice.
Well, maybe we'll see.
And when we get to the end of the episode, we'll see how it turns out. But I'm betting that will at least be a decent choice on your part.
Well, what do you got going on?
Well, you know how in general I like to try and have new and different products as my modeling fluid. But every once in a while, you do have to go back to the old standby. This week, I've got the beer of Plastic Model Mojo, Gumball Head. My wife was kind enough to bring a 6-pack home. So I already know that I'm going to enjoy this modeling fluid. There's not much surprise for the end of the episode, but sometimes you got to go with the tried and true.
Well, I know that's going to end.
Yes, you do.
Dave, we had a lot of listener mail last time because we kind of doubled up because we skipped an episode.
Right.
Sandbagged them. And I tell you, I ran those right up to probably the day we recorded that session or that episode. I received them up until that point and put them all in. So a little lighter this week. So no problems there, but a little bit shorter segment, I guess.
Okay. That's all right.
Well, it is. First up is Andrew Armstrong from Center Point, New York. And he wants to know if he heard a Flight of the Intruder reference in the last episode. Loves the book and the movie and was just curious. That would be correct.
Yes.
For me, the single scene out of that entire movie that I remember, when somebody says Flight of the Intruder, I remember them singing Petula Clark's Downtown.
Downtown. That's right. You know, I'm glad our listeners listen closely for those things because sometimes they pass over my head, even my head. So it's kind of nice to have somebody point them out.
I think you got that one.
I did get that one.
Next is Andrew Whitey from the Model Geeks podcast. And he was listening to our episode with Ed Baroth and discussing all stuff about the Edwards Air Force Base Museum and models and pop culture, particularly the Twilight Zone episode diorama Ed's kicking around. You mentioned the $6 million man.
Yep.
And the HL10 lifting body.
Right.
Whitey was a big fan, too, of that show as a kid. Everybody remembers the opening sequence of that thing tumbling across the desert floor or wherever it was. I guess it was out there, though. Maybe it was on a runway.
Yeah, exactly.
He was doing some research for an HL10 model.
Yep.
And he stumbled, there was a later episode where they revisited Edwards Air Force Base and the HL10. It's called The Deadly Replay. And I guess there's more footage of the HL10, along with NASA's and Edwards F-104 footage and just a lot of shots in and around the base. And he said he knew Ed wasn't a big fan of the show based on his comments in the episode, but he's given a thumbs up to this diorama idea.
Well, I'll have to go back and I remember all those episodes because, who didn't watch those shows? But I'll have to go back and see if I can find that particular episode that Whitey's referencing and view it again. Because sometimes you go back and you're like, that's amazing. You know, I remembered it, but didn't remember it.
Yeah. There's a detail like these other planes you just you absorbed as a kid is just part of the entertainment, right? And now you got a different appreciation for what's actually being shown.
Yep.
He was doing some research for the 72nd scale Anagrad kit.
Yeah.
Apparently they missed a few things in the forward cockpit section, but he stumbled across a YouTube video, and I haven't looked yet. We can put this link in the show notes. It's part of this episode, apparently, from 1974.
Oh, okay. Well, good.
Pretty
We'll have to look at that.
Thanks, Whitey. And Ed, if you're listening too, I know you are. There's a thumbs up for your diorama idea from a really cool dude. So
yeah.
Thanks, Whitey. Christian Gurney, our friend up there in Wisconsin with Bases by Bill.
Yeah.
They have a show coming up in March.
Okay.
Mad City Modelers 28th annual contest. Saturday, March 2nd, 2024. Christian says the club president, or he told the club president that the show hadn't gotten much exposure on social media or podcasts or whatever. So he volunteered to change that. And I will extend the invitation for maybe he can come on for a pitch if he wants.
Yes, absolutely.
March 2nd. That's going to come up in February sometime. So Christian, if that interests you, let us know.
Yes, absolutely.
The short of it is Mad City Modelers, Saturday, March 2nd, 2024. It's at the Monona Terrace Convention Center, same as the National Convention.
Well, good. That'll be a great dry run.
It will. All right. Thanks, Christian. And I told you the list was short.
Was that it?
No, I've got one more from Michael Karnauka.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we always end with Michael.
This is an interesting one.
Okay.
You're shopping in a big box store, Costco, BJ's, Sam's Club, etc. And you notice they have a modeling section now. What items would you hope they have that you place in your oversized cart next to your $4.99 rotisserie chicken?
Like a case of something, because that's the whole point of these Costco, Sam's Club, is you buy in bulk. So you're going to either buy 12 of the same model kit or a 12-pack bottles of Mr. Color leveling thinner
or a gallon jug.
Or a gallon jug, right?
That's what I would want. That'd be the bomb there, man.
High on my list would be in bulk Mr. Color leveling thinner. If I'm going for a kit, a 12-pack of Tamiya Zeros, particularly
somehow I knew that was coming.
Yeah, particularly if it's an assortment pack where you get all the different versions, that would be the best.
I'm kind of like supplies. I mean, how about
Infinity sanding sticks?
Yeah, or the ones from FlexiFile.
Yes,
that's about what I was about to say.
Yep.
Amazing how this works sometimes. Yeah, about a 50-pack of those things.
Exactly.
And a whole brick of sanding film.
So is there any kit that you'd want a 12 of?
No, probably not. I don't need 12 of anything. But supplies, that's where it's at, man.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, that's where your economy of scale is gonna happen.
Yep.
Well, you know, those zeros, they could put like 12 in one box, right? Not like a bale of 12 kits, but like Kleenex or something. But
yes, they could.
A big box with the sprues for 12 kits in it.
If they could do it that way, that would be perfectly acceptable.
Well, we can only dream, Dave.
Yep, that's right.
Dave, what's been going on Facebook?
Well, we've had, again, because of the fact that we doubled up last time, there's been a little bit less, but there are a few that I want to highlight. Listener Ken Cox wrote in because you had mentioned that one of the things you got was a lighting upgrade for your spray booth. And he reached out because he wanted to know what particular items you had purchased to upgrade the lighting in your spray booth. And you were kind enough to actually send him links to the items, for which he was grateful. And if you haven't posted those links on the dojo, go ahead and do so.
Yeah, I should do that. And I need to get on and getting it installed because
I hear you.
I'm definitely going to want those going forward with my little airplane.
Yep. Our friend Bruce Warall reached out and wanted to make sure that we were coming to Heritage Con this year. He was a few episodes behind and had just gotten through episode 100. And he was, because he's been traveling in Eastern Europe. So, but he wanted to make sure that we were going to get to Heritage Con, which, yes, we are, absent the life-altering events, we're going to get to Heritage Con. Listener Scott Wadko asked an interesting question. Do you ever have too much modeling mojo? Because what had happened was he had started a kit late one night and really was going to town with it. And then the next morning, he had all his other obligations to do, but all he could think about was getting back to the bench and making more progress on the model. And so he wanted to know if we had ever encountered a time where you had too much modeling mojo.
Well, I think I would chalk that up to an exercise in tempering enthusiasm.
Yeah. Well, but I will admit that there are times that, I've made good progress at the bench and it's the next morning and I've got something else to do, particularly I've got to go to work, and I'll find myself at work thinking about the next steps on the project and anticipating when I'll be able to get home and hit the bench to get the next steps done, which, probably in some respects not the best, but it's not the worst problem in the world to have.
Well, that's better than taking it with you to work and not doing your job.
Yeah, well, my employer would frown on that, I'm pretty sure.
I mean, you can think about stuff. Unfortunate how work gets in the way sometimes.
Yeah, really. Yeah, really. These things like work and family, why do they have to get in the way of modeling? I mean, come on. Finally, a listener reached out to me, Alvaro, and I'm going to take my best shot at the last name, Magion, and he's from Spain, which is why I pronounced that the way I did. He wrote in to thank us. He's listening to the podcast. He enjoys it, etc., etc. One of the reasons that he listens to the podcast is an attempt to improve his spoken English. He understands and reads English well, but he's still finding spoken English a challenge. And so he listens to our podcast in addition for the modeling related stuff to try and work on spoken English. And I will admit that there is a little bit of me, first of all, very flattering. Second of all, a little humbling. And third of all, the idea that there's a guy over in Spain who might speak English with a Southern Kentucky accent, just really top notch. It brought a smile to my face, but it was very kind of him to reach out and to A, thank us, but B, to tell us that that's one of the things he was doing. And I never would have even thought of that.
Well, I'm glad you said he was a modeler too, because I was about to ask. I hope he's a scale modeler.
Yes, he's a scale modeler, and he's listening to us for the modeling portion of the pod. He's just also using it
as a secondary purpose.
Right, a secondary purpose of improving his spoken English. But that just made my day. That was a DM, and I talk about this all the time, how 4 years plus into the podcast, I'll get an email or a DM from a listener out of the blue. Maybe we've spoken at a show, maybe we've never met, maybe we've never interacted. And just in the middle of the day, I'll get something like that, and it will brighten my whole day. And that one certainly did.
Is that it?
That's it.
Well, folks, we want you to write in. Let's have some new folks this time.
Yes.
More new folks. More new folks. We've got a few new folks this time.
Yes.
But if you haven't ever written into the show before, drop us a line or a Facebook instant message. You can do the email to plasticmodelmojo@gmail.com, or you can go to the Plastic Model Mojo Facebook page and DM us there.
Yep. I'd like to take a moment and thank everybody who has taken the time to rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you listen on. It's a great help. It helps make the show more visible, and it helps keep the show growing, which we continue to do, and we appreciate your help. In addition, if you know another modeler who doesn't listen to the podcast, if you would encourage them to listen to Plastic Model Mojo, we'd appreciate it. A recommendation from a friend is the absolute best form of advertising that we can get, and it is the surest way for the show to continue to grow.
In addition to that, please check out all our other friends out there in the model sphere creating content. There's a lot of fellow podcasts. And if you go to modelpodcast.com, that's modelpodcastplural.com, you'll find a website that has an aggregate of the banner links to all the podcasts who are participating in the Spirit of Cross promotion with us. And that was set up by Stuart Clark at Scale Model Podcast up in Canada. So we appreciate that. We got a lot of blog and YouTube friends, Dave. We got Chris Wallace, model airplane maker, great blog and YouTuber. His stuff's coming along. Sprue Pie with Frets, Stephen Lee, great short form blogs, model updates, build updates, and then his long form content's always entertaining. Jim Bates, Scale Canadian TV. Like to see him keep moving forward. So Jim, let's have something, man.
He's going to drop one. He tells me he's going to drop a YouTube episode, hopefully before this episode drops.
Panzermeister 36, Evan McCallum. He's been at it pretty hard here lately too. He's got a new video and threatening with another one here soon. So check out Evan's work at Panzermeister 36 on YouTube. And finally, Jeff Groves, Inch High Guy, who's finally joined us on the dojo on Facebook.
Yes.
Glad to see that. That was a big step for him, I think, because
yes, it was.
He was trying to avoid the insanity.
Yeah. And who can blame him?
Nobody can blame him. But
if you limit yourself to just modeling Facebook, you'll be okay.
Thanks for coming on board, Jeff.
Yes.
And hopefully we'll see you soon.
Well, there's one other YouTube channel that you probably should mention, given our guest.
Well, you're right. You need to check out Paul Budzik's Scale Model Workshop.
Yes.
A great collection of how-to stuff and some modeling philosophy along the way, too. So please check out Paul's YouTube channel.
It is a great channel. Really well worth spending a little time over there. Finally, if you are not a member of your national IPMS organization, IPMS USA, IPMS Canada, IPMS Japan, IPMS China, whatever country you live in, please consider joining the national organization. These national organizations are groups of volunteers who give up some of their modeling time in order to attempt to make modeling as a whole better. And they have many benefits. Different national organizations do things a little differently, but definitely worth joining your national organization. In addition, if you're an armor modeler, the Armor Modeling Preservation Society, AMPS, is a international organization devoted to armor modeling and the promotion of armor modeling and armor clubs and events. If that's your thing, please consider joining. They're a great group of guys.
Dave, let's pause a minute here and get a word from our sponsor.
Plastic Model Mojo is now brought to you by Model Paint Solutions, your source for Harder Steenbeck airbrushes, David Union power tools, and laboratory-grade mixing, measuring, and storage tools for use with all your model paints, be they acrylic, enamels, or lacquers. Check them out at www.modelpaintsolutions.com.
It's the all-American red, white, and blue, Dave.
Yep. It's coming up fast.
At the time of this recording, my friend, it is 176 days until the IPMS National Convention in Madison, Wisconsin.
That is going to be the blink of an eye.
Now, just like last episode, the first wave of hotel rooms have come and gone, so
right,
folks are going to need to pay attention to that. But they've kind of made it easy to pay attention. I've got a couple of places you're going to need to visit to stay abreast of the situation. The first is the National Convention website, which is nats2024.com, www.nats2024.com. The National Convention website, and you're going to find a ton of information there, and be on the lookout for their action reports. Still waiting on a new one there. Haven't seen one yet in a while, but I got to think there'll be an update there soon.
Yeah, there will be one very soon, I happen to know.
And in addition to the National Convention website, you should join the Facebook group, the 2024 IPMS National Convention Facebook group. There you're going to get almost a daily status report of what's coming and what's going on. So please check all that out. I know we're really looking forward to this, and the swell is starting, albeit slightly right now. But the chatter amongst our personal friend group is starting to get a little louder.
Yeah, and registration is going to open up sometime in the next couple of weeks. And again, once it opens, you'll want to, if you're going to the Nationals in Madison, you'll want to register online early, get it done, so that when you get there, you have a completely smooth, trouble-free process of just simply walking up, picking up your registration packet, and being able to get into the model and vendor rooms right away.
That's for sure, man. And again, I'm looking forward to it.
I am looking forward to it big time.
Well, Dave, this guest tonight is one of my favorites out there. And I've wanted to get him on for a long time. And part of it has been me being bashful because such an influence on my personal modeling journey. And then he showed up on one of the other podcasts. So I had to do a mental reset on what I might want to talk about. And then he showed up on another podcast and I do another mental reset on what I might want to talk about. But here in the new year, we got him scheduled for last episode in January. And we had a really good conversation with Dr. Paul Budzik.
It was really fantastic.
Dave, tonight's guest has managed to keep my attention now for a few decades. This goes back to my days as a neophyte scale modeler with his craftsman-oriented articles in the early years of fine scale, and then later with his informative videos from his YouTube channel, The Scale Model Workshop. And most recently, he's had a couple appearances on some of our fellow podcasts, the Sprue Cutters Union and On the Bench. Dr. Paul Budzik, welcome to Plastic Model Mojo.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Dave knows I'm excited to have you with us. For a little background for our listeners, your articles in the 80s really connected with me as an upstart, quote unquote, serious modeler. As we discussed a little bit earlier before we started recording, my dad was a dentist. He's a retired dentist now. And I just could really relate to and had access to all these, again, quote unquote, exotic tools and materials that always showed up in your articles. I just can remember taking the article and say, "Hey, Dad, what's this? Do you have that? Can we use it?" And it was, the answer was usually yes, because he usually had it. So, dental acrylic powders and resins and vacuform machine and just stuff like that.
Yeah, and I refer to those fine scale articles. That was back in the golden age of fine scale, where it wasn't what it is now, the same article again and again and again. And you got people who were using unusual techniques, unusual tools, and fine scale wasn't afraid to publish that.
Well, that's a function of Bob Hayden. He, you may not know, he was a model railroader, and his scale was HO narrow gauge, which meant you built everything from scratch. And when he and I had a luncheon conversation one time in Atlanta, IPMS convention, he knew all the old characters of model railroading that I knew. And model railroading had a history of having guys that you would classify as real characters. And so we had the same stories, and it was just like being home. And so when he called me to get me involved in fine scale when it started, what his idea is to bring together all these different techniques and different subjects. And I think he did a phenomenal job in the time he was there. And when he left, it made it hard to stay with fine scale because we had a rapport. We could talk to each other on the phone, and he was, we were on the same page all the time.
Were you there from the absolute beginning, 1982, 83?
Yeah, he wanted me there, but I don't work deadlines too well. And so my first issue was December of 82. He wanted me in the charter issue, but it didn't happen. And then the lead time being what it is, even though I got it in soon after that, it still took, I think it was the third issue even at that, it was just basically, here are some details that you could add to Grand Prix cars. So things developed later as I wanted to become a little bit more relevant to plastic scale modeling because my forte was really miniature machine work and scratch building.
Well, you went into quite a bit of that. In fact, our first, at least podcast related email that exchange we had was I'd confused Paul Boyer and Bob Hayden, and you had corrected me. I was pleased to know that you were listening to our podcast. That made me happy.
No, I don't miss it. I don't miss your podcast.
Well, thank you. You went through a lot of that story on the bench, and we can direct our listeners to that, so you don't have to retell the whole bloody thing. But all that to kind of get to a point about the hobby landscape overall since then. You know, fine scale modelers changed, decline in print media due to a number of pressures. You know, Aaron Skinner, he's got his work cut out for him, and I don't fault him. You know, he's left to cast a broader net, and unfortunately he's casting it in shallower water, in my opinion, just to reach a broader appeal to keep selling magazines. But again, the hobby landscape's changed since those days in the 80s and 90s. How's that affected your vision in the hobby? And I don't know, how does that kind of relate to your time well spent byline?
In a way, not a whole lot. I mean, I try to avoid, I can't be like a one size fits all. My point is not to search for relevancy, and sort of that's part of the reason of switching into this different format. You know, that's the YouTube model, is give us more content. What I do is going to appeal to some people, and to a large part, it may not appeal to people at all. I mean, and having done it for a long time, what I've been doing is boiling things down into what I consider more the essence of scale modeling. And and in some regards, it's going in a different direction, and people will just go, well, for sure, that's obviously what we want to do. We want to have more detail. We want to have more detail. And I'm going to be the heretic in the room that says, why?
Yeah. Amen.
So I look at incongruities. Okay, you're going to put all this detail on this piece, and then what? So you can take a picture under a 60 times macro or something and put it on YouTube. But if somebody comes over to your model with a flashlight to look at the detail, they're going to get their picture taken, splashed all over Facebook, and you're going to make fun of them. So, or you complain about the judges looking at it. So my question would be, why is the detail there? Is it just to impress people? Are you really wanting it? Or I know for me, when I've created a model, you know, that's like in the back when I did the McLaren or something that had a lot of individual machine parts, it's sitting on my desk. I never once take the engine cover off. I don't care about it. In my head, I'm going, I created those parts, but I never look at them. I'm looking at it at 2 feet away. I appreciate the shape, and I appreciate the history. And Dave, when you talk about history, that's why I pick certain subjects. That's the whole draw. So I don't need every little nut and bolt. And in fact, sometimes if you're pushing the scale, or because you have the ability to create some little detail, maybe it has to be tweaked a little bit because it won't print. And all those things kind of look like somebody with a bad complexion after a while. So boil it down to what's necessary. You know, I would love to be artistic enough to figure out what is it that I need to suggest so that somebody fills it in with what they want to see. Just like listening to an old radio show or something. You didn't need the video, or you're reading a book. You formulated what the character looked like from a suggestion. I would love to create that sort of feeling with a model, and I'm still searching for exactly how to do it. And that's part of my reticence about, I understand you can go create all kinds of wonderful details with 3D, but it isn't so much. There's part of it's an energy thing, but part of it is, I don't even know if I want all that detail.
Do you think that part of that, and I don't mean this to sound, I think I'm experiencing it. The older I get, the less time I know I have, and the less, because I have teenage children still, I'm still working, and I'm going to be working for quite a while. So my time is limited. And do you think when you're 60 and you look at a project that you've got a different attitude than somebody who's 30? And as far as the amount of detail that you're going to put in, that you know will never be seen by anyone? Do you think that's a maturity that comes along as you become an older modeler?
I don't, as far as building detail that you can't see, I don't think I've ever had an inclination to do that. And that's part of my sort of splitting off from when I did the PBY, and then John Alcorn and these took notice that they wanted me in the scratch building book. And so he used some of my finished photos, but he wanted me in the second one. And I didn't belong in there because I don't build that way. If you can't see it, for me, it's like I don't need to do it.
Right.
So my models are basically solid models with areas of detail so that you fill in, oh yeah, he's got an interior in there, or I'll create something and people go, well, what did you use for reference? There's no reference. I just eyeballed it from a photograph. And the idea was to make it look as convincing as possible, kind of a la Chapin. But what I do find, Dave, is this. I wonder, do I even want to go down this road because my time is limited, on this earth?
Right.
So what is it about the modeling? It's when I leave the bench, I feel satisfied and at peace, and I sleep better because I'm not on the computer getting a lot of blue light stimulation or whatever, because it's just I slip into an energy space when I'm working with my hands, and that's what's really important. I don't really, I'm at a point where I don't care if I finish the project. What I don't want is a lot of frustration if I decide I want to build a kit and the kit's kind of not up to snuff. Then I part of me goes, well, I'll just shelve it and build it from scratch, because then I'll be working in a solid, homogeneous structure instead of fighting over filler and, softened up styrene. And that gets to be frustrating, pushing a soggy styrene around.
You sound like Mike.
And there's a little bit of Dave in there too. And it's kind of gets me to my second point. Paul, we were kind of prepping for this. I had pulled a few of your musings videos. Well, I brought them to your attention. These are some themes I would like to kind of talk around, because I thought they were kind of congruent with some of the themes on our show. And one of those was what's important about a plastic model kit. And to kind of frame this, he's saying, you sound like me, and I'm saying there's a little bit of both. Well, here's why. Dave and I come from philosophically opposite corners of the modeling enjoyment spectrum.
True. Because
Dave wants an X, Y, and a Z in the display collection. Is that fair, Dave?
Yep, absolutely.
He's a final product or a destination kind of driven modeler.
Yeah.
Me, by contrast, a kit represents a box of parts that may or may not be useful to construct a model of X to meet my personal standard of what I want to create. Because I revel in the process and in the challenges, that's kind of the way I am. And to use the term that you expressed some dissatisfaction with on the OTB segment you did, I would say I'm a journey modeler. So what are your thoughts on the glut of available subjects in this golden age we seem to be in? And more specifically, and you hinted on it a minute ago, do subject availability and kit quality concern you at all? Or are you more subject driven? Is it just the finished subject that interests you, or is there more to achieve between your ears, to say, in your cerebral aspects of craftsmanship and modeling that guide you in subject selection?
Well, my pick of a subject is always based on the historical, my connection to what I'm doing. And in fact, the watchword for why I'm switching platforms to Patreon doesn't have to do with income. I'm going to keep it as a token. It's not token. It's just a small acknowledgement, because I don't want to belittle any sort of subscription cost, but it's just kind of a vote of confidence of what I'm doing.
And on top of that, the next layer to that is having the finished subject.
Yes. Your
motivator, or is it what you're going to be doing all along the way to get there?
Well, okay. So that's where I was going with that. A lot of the YouTube stuff, and I know it's aggravating to some people, is like, well, where's the finished model? There are times when there were a lot of times I'll just buy a kit to solve a problem if I'm looking in those days on a forum board or whatever, and I see people grumbling about, well, about how bad the kit is. And of course, my background is, well, fix it. You're a modeler. It's just plastic. So, like the Texas model the trumpeter did. It had the very large shelf. It was so ill proportioned the way they did the hull. And so, okay, so here's a way to fix it.
An ill-proportioned trumpeter kit? I have never heard of such a thing.
Well, and that's, for me, it's like you don't put lipstick on a pig. The first thing is it has to look like what it's supposed to in shape.
Agreed.
And so just because it's got recessed panels or whatever, that doesn't forgive a bad shape. So I would rather have a shape, which now this is probably going to not make you happy, Dave, but I have no problem rescribing, especially the way I do it.
I admire people with those skills, and I would like to get better at them.
Well, but what I do is very few people, I had to laugh because Spencer Pollard almost made it sound like he had to get a stiff drink and get his head around what I was doing when he did this. But my approach is with a lot of these old monogram kits, because the panel lines are raised, it's very easy for me. Put it together, correct the shape, sand it down, and basically create a solid model, and then add back the surface detail that I want. And so if you learn how to scribe into the paint, it is a one-shot, fast as can be. I mean, it's so easy, but people have trouble thinking, well, what am I going to do if I make a mistake? Well, if you do your first couple lines and start getting comfortable and learning how to use, maybe like I would use a solid edge for the most part, a thin piece of brass shim that's flexible, tape on one side, make sure your scribe is up against that rule, you can just slide it right along and you won't make a mistake. And I'm telling you, an evening of doing that is so peaceful. It reminds me of when I'm rigging a square rig ship or something. It's just, you're in that zone.
I wish I could get in that zone, because to me, one of the most stressful parts is rescribing any model.
And that is what I told Mike when we were talking about like that Tamiya P38 kit. That's a whole different deal. That annoys the heck out of me. And I just want to, no, I'm not going to go there. Because if you're going to do these phenomenally detailed kits with all recessed panels, and you're going to split the assemblies along the panel line, that panel, those two panels that go together, they have to go together, and the line has to be consistent with the rest of the scribing. And that P38J kit, that doesn't happen. It is a bear. And so what you have is if you use the Tamiya extra thin, I do this a lot. I know a lot of guys do. You put it together and you run a little thin cement over there and let it go in through capillary action, and that's the way you handle it. Well, once you do that, that becomes softened. And now if you have to go in and touch up that line, it's the plastic is now soft and it isn't going to be clean anymore. And that's more difficult than if I took a solid surface, one solid material, and I just scribe a line in it. I'm going to get a consistent line that's very sharp. So when I do I'm doing a monogram model and I've got all the filling done and everything's put together and the contour is beautiful, I prime it up, paint it, and the scribing goes through the paint into the primer, very even, very sharp, really, really thin. So it's a scale scribe and it's a one-shot thing. There's nothing to clean up. Just blow it off, or you can take a scuff pad and just knock off any excess. That was the beauty of Floquil paint. It was a real material and it held up under that. So it gets a little more challenging with some of these acrylic paints because it's an acrylic. That means it's got a plastic component to it. So it may not scribe as clean as Floquil did, which is more of a true lacquer that doesn't have any acrylic part of it. So it's just a pigment with some sort of a binder, but it doesn't catalyze into an acrylic polymer, and that lets it scribe differently. So
Yeah, I think some of those lacquer and even enamels they dry as an crude representation of a bonded pile of pigment,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And by contrast, these acrylics, these polymer paints, they dry into a skin, so they don't sand very nice, and they probably don't scribe very nice either.
no.
And Flokewool was kind of unique because of the Dysol, and for better or worse a description, it attacked the plastic a little bit.
Yeah.
It became the surface.
I always think of Flokewool as being an actual, almost like a building material,
Yeah.
like you would use some kind of a lacquer-based putty or something. But the rest of these things are like coatings. They just lay there. You pray that they stay there. It's like, hopefully there's some sort of a bonding. But I don't like that. Flokewool had a real problem with you had to learn how to really handle it because it would build up in corners. And that's where you learned putting it on wet. It was called Flokewool because that's what you were supposed to do, is
Right.
flow it on. So you learned those techniques that I think you don't have to so much now. And for that, I'm okay with losing it. When you had to build an old Walther's passenger car and you painted it with Flokewool and used Walther's decals, the idea that you didn't have silvering, forget it. It was nothing but silver,
So we've got a lot of kits now. It's really, not only are we getting esoteric subjects, we're getting them from more than one manufacturer a lot of time. Really nice, I guess, if you wanted those things kitted. But back to the main point, Dave, again, life's too short to build crappy kits. I've never let a crappy kit stop me.
I would argue you almost seek out crappy kits, but that's another discussion.
With my projects, I'm always looking they're subject driven. I'll pick a subject. And if the kit is some one-off brand from Eastern Europe, which at the time I built the subject Dave always references, that's kind of what it was. And, I rebuilt like 75% of the model from scratch, and it just had a ball of a time doing it. Now I look back at that model and think, how did I even do it? Because philosophically, I've my mindset's changed. I still do a lot of that stuff, but I don't really remember how I did it.
No, I agree. But for me, I have a little different bend. I would say if I bought a kit, I want to use it as a kit. And that would be like, in the old days, what I would do is I would have one scratch built project or something that was a really more of a big modification, something that I might put in the magazines or whatever. And then I would throw together a piece of armor, or I'd build something for the ceiling. And part of it was just to practice painting or try out a new technique. That was basically the main function of it. But there was always this other project that I would go back to. But for the most part, if I had to really build a kit and correct all the mistakes, in the back of my head, I'm going, you're not paying me to fix this, and I'm not going to put it in the magazines and fluff it off, so I'm just going to start it from scratch. I'm just going to draw it up and I'm just going to make it, because my substrate is one homogeneous material that I can work with. I don't like to have pieces of styrene all pieced together, go from one surface that's this, one's harder than the other. It's just too much of a pain. I'll just let me start over again, which doesn't work for, obviously the majority of people aren't going to say that, they're going to go, life's too short. Well, I can actually do it from scratch faster. Take like this hull that I did for the Enterprise. There's a fellow that I know from the forum boards who took the resin kit and the what he had to do to make that look right. I had the scratch built wooden hull done in like a fraction of the time, and had more fun with it because I was out in the shop with a file generating the shape, and I wasn't working with somebody else's half into their resin, half into my buildup. I had one solid piece of wood, and I love working with wood. And so when it's all done and I'm sanding it out, I've got one homogeneous surface to work with. So I don't like working with kits and trying to correct everything if I've got to use different substrates. That doesn't work for me. And because I'm not interested in collections anymore, because nobody's coming to my house to look at a museum. I gave that up a long time ago. Even if you built something and you wanted to give it to a museum, they're probably going to say, no, we don't need it. So I'm one subject, and the older I get and the time gets more finite, it's got to be, the projects are more like bucket list projects, and they're all one-off. I love English tea clippers. I'm going to go back to doing that. At least there's going to be one that I take with me when we downsize the house or whatever. There's a box that I want to do that will make Barry and Jim happy. And that's on the list. And there's just certain things, they don't relate. They don't go together in a collection. The only thing that's sort of a collection is what goes up on the ceiling. And so when I grab a kit and that's what I want to do, I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to fix it to go on the ceiling. And I'm going to tell you that when I go on the internet or I go on a forum, now on the Facebook, I get suckered in just like everybody else. I'll go, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. I've got to keep up with the Joneses. If I do this and somebody sees it, they're going to say Budzik's falling off, the cheese is falling off his cracker, because it's not what they're used to. And that, unfortunately, is pressure that I put on myself. That's what I want to have people get away from, because I do it on a slightly different level, but I think it affects everybody. And when they go, well, I'm burnt out with it, I wonder if that's part of the equation, that you're not really in touch with what you want to do.
Well, we've got a friend up in Canada who works at a hobby shop. And the thing that he has seen, that he's retired and he works at the hobby shop a couple of days a week just to be around the hobby shop. And what he has seen is people coming in who are new or fairly new to the hobby, who have seen all the YouTubes and who want to buy the exact items they have seen the YouTubers use. And they're convinced that if they buy the stuff the YouTubers use, they've seen the video, that their first model is going to be what they've seen in the YouTube video. And his concern is that sets people up for disappointment and frustration. And I love YouTube, and I love all of the modeling stuff that's available. But I do think there is the possibility of there being a downside to it, in that you feel like you're not keeping up with the Joneses.
Let me add on to that, because this, Dave, it's like you saw my outline, but you missed the last bullet.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good. That's our friend Ian up in Ottawa, and I had this on here because I wanted to talk about it. So good job, Dave.
Thank you.
This is a skills-based hobby, and in a metaphorical sense, you can't buy the knife already sharp.
Right.
You got to do it, right?
Right.
So what do you think, Paul? We've got these people who, like Ian sees at the hobby shop, that they come in the shop, they scoop up all the avant-garde modeling supplies and weathering stuff, and they saw some guy on YouTube, and they've got this image in the mind's eye, and it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think the genie's out of the bottle. You can't bury all the YouTube videos, and that's what drew him in. But, in some ways, maybe someone like myself is a beneficiary of that, because I grew up in a time where you had a magazine came out once a month, and I didn't grow up really well off, so I didn't even see that many magazines. So you bought a kit and you did it your way, and you progressed at your own pace. So there wasn't that there was no impetus to, well, I've got to do it like this guy. And Part of what I want to do with my channel is to say, don't do it like that guy. Okay, like I was telling Mike when we were chit-chatting a little bit before this, I almost want to change my channel name to the metaphysical macro modeler. Here's what I believe, and it's going to seem like it's way out, although that Philip Reed Zen of modeling is. I believe that when I look around and when I try to figure out why is it we create things, why is it we do this, there's no absolute use for what we create. When we build a model, you make a painting, you do music, whatever it is, that's an art form in a way. It can be. And why? It serves no function. You can't eat it. It's a beauty thing. And when you look around at the world, at the earth, the way it's formed and everything, it's too perfect. There's too many beautiful things. So there's this energy of creation, however you want to term it, in the universe, whatever. And when we're in a space, when we're doing what we do, or another form of art, you're close to that energy of creation for creative sake. There's no other reason for it. And everybody is an individual that contributes to that collective. The contrast between this individual and that individual, that's what makes the universe. And what I fear is that when we're in this social media bubble, there's this inclination to homogenize everything. And I want to make it like this guy because that's the acceptable way to do it. And I somehow, in my own little way, would like to encourage people to be an individual. I really think, now, again, you should never comment on what somebody else wrote without talking to them. But I know there's been a kerfuffle about Mike Rinaldi, and I don't know what the deal was. I never read it. I just don't like to see people make negative comments about people without talking to them. But what I would like to think that basically what might have been the intention was that things have gotten homogenized. And there's less and less individuality. Things are maybe 2 points from what was done before, but people aren't just taking the bit and going, I may come up with a different concept and I'm comfortable with it. I don't care if it works, but it works for me. And that may be what may be missing from new is that it's more and more homogenized. Not necessarily that it's not a new technique. The techniques progress, but it's like I'm doing it, so now everybody does it. Now we're going to move into this, so everybody does this. Now I'm listening to the posse guys say, well, let's do dry brushing. I never knew it left. Dry brushing was, where did it go? It was always there.
Mike could tell you about how it left and came back.
Well, to me, it was always part of a step. It had a function. It didn't mean that you had to quit doing it. It just means in some cases, I'm listening to, well, you don't have to dry brush with something that's real. No, you didn't. When I was dry brushing, it would be 2 shades off of what I was dry brushing with, just to create a little lightness in an area or something. It needs to be sort of subtle. I happen to was a charter member of the National Association of Photoshop Professionals when it started. So I went to a lot of these conventions in Las Vegas or whatever. Well, the idea about photo retouching was you don't retouch somebody so that their mother doesn't recognize them anymore. And, and that it doesn't look like it's been retouched. So if you're going to do these things, you keep them subtle, but everybody wants to do it in that, they follow what's being done.
Well, I do think back when all we had was magazines and whatever somebody in your local club was doing, you went to a model contest and you saw a wider variation of model completion and finish. And I think compared to nowadays, where you'll go to a model contest, there is a sameness because of the YouTube effect that what has become the acceptable finish has actually narrowed from what it used to be. And I'm not sure that's a plus for the modeling community.
Yeah, I'll look down a contest table and I'll go, they all look the same.
Yeah.
They're different subjects, but it was interesting because there's a young guy that I've known since he's been a kid. And he has an aftermarket company now. I'm not going to give his name. Everybody's going to know who it is. And I hadn't seen him for some years. And he'd stopped building a lot of kits and stuff. He goes, I've already built, I don't want to keep building the same thing over and over again. And people don't understand it. Right. It's a different subject, but think about it. It's a single seat World War II fighter. It's got two fuselage halves. The wings go together the same way. It's the same thing.
Right.
And so maybe what you're getting burnt out is, when you say I'm getting burnt out, is that you need a challenge. And a challenge that's realistic to maybe achieve. You don't want to pick some magnus opus thing that's going to take forever, but something that's a little different that offers you a challenge, like the challenge that you had when you were a youngster. And it was just a challenge to put the kit together. Well, you've gone past that. So your challenge now is a little different, but it's not doing the same. It's like when I got into this, after I started scratch building a few aircraft, it's the same thing again. It was hard to get through the Tempest project because it was do the research, grab Bentley's drawing, cut out the templates, do this. I'm doing the same thing that I did before. And what I want is a new technique. I want to try something different. Okay, so the landing gear took a huge amount of effort to machine, but it was the same techniques in the machining. And therein lies the thing. Mike, when we're working in a miniature lathe, it doesn't run itself. No. There's no digital readout. There's no power feed. You turn the crank and it goes. You turn the crank the other way and you got two thousandths backlash. So you have to learn how to work that thing. But once you do that, and a lot of what I did was to machine something to a certain point, and then the finish work, or even the complete shape, was done with a file. It's still the same technique over and over again, and part of me craves doing a different subject that requires a different technique, like going out, taking a file, shaping a hull. But if I had to do hulls all day long, that would get boring too. So maybe that's what burns people out. And so you may have a wide selection of kits like what you're talking about, but I get a little bit bored grabbing just a kit to finish, to put it on my shelf. In that case, I know people I just go buy a die cast and put it in my display case. And I did that with race cars. I got a case now full of, and these are not, $2 die casts,
right.
But
oh no, they're very high end. I know somebody who collects them.
Right. But the finish is beautiful. And what I'm interested in is a lot of times and I'm not drinking tonight, but we have a weed dram and we're going to talk about the history of the thing.
Right.
And we're going to enjoy the conversation over what this is. Not so much, I'm not going to hand you a flashlight and I'm not going to tell you, look at this little detail, because pretty soon their eyes are going to fold over and they're not even going to want to be there anymore. So, they're not model makers. We're just using that as a jumping off point to discuss something else or whatever. So yeah, the wide selection of kits is wonderful. I think that's great. And if you're into building collections, myself, I'm not, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's great. What I would like to see, though, with the kits is a little bit more concern, at least on the part of some manufacturers, of the shape. And Mike, you can tell an engineer's signature probably about who designed what. And you get a feel for who it is that created. I mean, I know when this thing was built in Italy or when it was built in Japan. When I look at a tool, I can tell where it came from. I don't need to look at made comes from. You get a feel for how It was put together, the steel that was used in it. It's got a different feel. And so what I see is some of these kits come through where the nacelles kind of screwed up because you couldn't scan in the shape. You had to actually draw it in, and they're not comfortable. They don't understand that the nuances in the curve. There's a lot of subtlety, and that's what you get when you're creating it with your hand, as an old pattern maker would. He's referring back to the photo or photos and creating that shape. And it's a different way. It's not as, you're not be able to grab a preformed circle and just cut it in quarters and throw it on the nacelle. That doesn't work. It was created in an analog fashion, and you need to approach it that way. And it requires someone who has an empathy for the subject and an ability to really look at curves. And it doesn't happen overnight. You have to get an eyeball for that. So I wish we had shape first, detail afterwards kits, rather than just cranking on a bunch of detail. Well, this is aircraft stuff because they have more curves. Armor's a little different, if you got a lot of square shape. With aircraft, shape to me is everything.
You're talking about the nuances of the curves and the analog part of it. Well, I've got this Hungarian truck from World War II I'm working on. There's no kit. I managed to get what I call a 3-view plus from the manufacturer of the vehicle, who's still in existence. It's the Reba Corporation in Hungary. And what I mean by 3-view plus is that it's a top and an elevation, and then the in view is split between the front and the rear. I've got a nice set of drawings, but they were drawn in 1939, which means they were done with a human hand and a pencil. So when I bring them into CAD and start trying to scale things and get straight lines to line up, there's a little bit of a problem there, and I'm working through that. But that's what I wanted to say. It's that's about as analog as you can get.
Right.
Trying to bring a hand drawn 3-view into CAD to use as a template. Yeah, there's no issues going to crop up there, are there?
Well, and therein lies the beauty of it in a way. You can take this two ways. You now have the option of creating your impression of that shape. What dismays me a little bit right now is when people talk about building models these days, it's throwing it together and then painting it. Everybody wants to paint. And when I hear people talk about how'd you build it, they just blow right by it. Like, did the kit just assemble itself? Don't tell me that. I know there were little things that you had to do to assemble that kit, but you blow right past it, and all you want to talk about is the colors of how you finished it. That to me is the icing on the cake. That's the afterwards. I'm into building the structure. That machine tells me the story. What the bits and pieces that I see, the shape of it, it tells me the aerodynamics. It explains the function, the reason for the existence of that shape. It's like, why was the Lockheed Constellation shaped the way it was? What was the function of where that tail's positioned and that S-curve fuselage? It wasn't easy to build. What was the function of it? Those things are what appeal to me. So when you talk about creating this shape or having to go, the plan to me would be a jumping off point. It would get me in the ballpark with some photographs, and then it's up to me. You may have to scale it. I mean, you're making a model. It's a model. Yeah. It's not the real thing. So what is it that you need to preserve? What is the impression of that shape that you want to leave the viewer with? That if you just scaled it down, it may not quite look right, and it may require a little tweaking. That is an art form. You made choices. If you just try to take something and shrink it down, it's a technical exercise. Yeah, it's wonderful. It's craftsmanship. But the art to me would come in as when you make a human choice of what you want the viewer to see. What emotion do you want? Wow, that thing looks like a bulldog. No, that thing looks delicate. Those are the elements that you bring into it that you might want to emphasize. It only comes from having an empathy for the subject. I remember talking to Bud Voss, who was the American representative with Tamiya, and we had a conversation one time, and we were talking about this. And he said that what Mr. Tamiya would do, they would, in general, assemble a team of engineers that were interested in the subject because of this reason. There were nuances about the subject that only somebody that would be interested in it could bring to the model. Well, Mr. Tamiya wanted a Zero. He wanted a Mitsubishi Zero, and he didn't care. Get the team together. Well, they put together people that really didn't understand the Zero, and Bud was an aircraft modeler. He said they'd come to me off the shop floor, and they were trying to create the spinner. And yeah, it went from point A to point B, but it didn't look like a Zero spinner. And he said, I had to go down on the shop floor on the lathe with a file and say, this is what it's supposed to look like. Because that little bit of a curve that goes from, where it meets the cowl to where it's going to finish out at the tip of that spinner needed to have just the right curve. And it took someone with an empathy for the shape to create that. So I would like to see a little bit more emphasis on that, but I know it's difficult. And so when I think of people correcting things and like what you're trying to do, I would say go for it. Put it together the way Mike sees it. And that in itself will be a creative expression of Mike. And that is what's important to the collective of the whole experience. And that sounds metaphysical and weird. I'm sorry.
but it may have saved my project.
But I would revel in that. I would go, that's me. And if somebody goes, chances are if you do it and you're the skill level that you're going to do it at, nobody would even dispute the shape.
Oh, no.
That's the saving grace. Yeah.
Right. Because there are 5 guys on the planet who are even familiar with the truck. But, that's something that you do on your YouTube channel. Is you have what we would think of as traditional modeling videos. And I cannot tell you how much I sympathized with all your pain over all the PT boats. Loved them. Absolutely. It's a project of mine eventually and wonderful. But then you have, in addition to those, almost as a completely separate item, more philosophical videos. It reminds me of our friend Stephen Lee, who does the blog Sprue Pie with Frets.
Very articulate guy. Yeah.
Yes, extremely. And he'll have build posts. I'm building this and this, and this. And then every once in a while, all of a sudden you get, here's something that's happening in modeling and here's what I think about it. And you seem to do, now he does it on a blog and you do it on a YouTube channel, but you seem to do that same thing where you've got traditional modeling videos, but you've also got, hey guys, let's stop and think a little bit about what we're doing, not how we're doing it. And what was the impetus behind you doing those more philosophical videos? Because I've got to say, I love them.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad. Well, because what are you doing when you're working? You're thinking about stuff, aren't you?
Well, hopefully, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Or you're going to saw your fingers off. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, been there, done that.
Yeah. So I don't see how you can spend this much time in something and not wonder why you're doing it. And my wife's a psychotherapist. I love this. So I'll come. So sometimes when we talk about the Facebook thing and I'll look and I'll think somebody's off the beam or I'm my own grumbling about it. And this stops you in your tracks every time. You ask this question. She'll go, well, maybe you should stop what you're doing. Maybe it's not that rewarding to you. And I said, well, no, I don't want to. Well, she says, you're getting something out of this. And so what is it you're getting out of it? And that's where I pose the questions. Well, your channel just channeled that plastic model mojo. In order to keep going in what we're doing, especially as you get older and you question the value of it, of spending the time, if you're in a family, taking time away from the family, the solo activity, what is it you're getting out of it? What is it really? Is it just building the same model every time? Or is it you know good and darn well there's something more than just creating that finished model or winning that trophy.
Yeah.
I would hope there's more than that. Otherwise, you're gonna quit doing it pretty soon. For me, I never stopped ever since can't remember, 4 or 5 years old. There was always some project going, even when all the other stuff was happening. There was time set aside to build some model that, whatever. It's just I loved miniatures, and there's got to be a reason for it. And that was the philosophical part of it. I just realized there's a lot more to it than just the procedural thing of putting a model together there, especially with the aspect of creativity, because even though you might think of it as a technical exercise, we do make some I would hope we make our own personal creative decision. Mm-hmm. That's what I would like to encourage.
On this show, we often encourage listeners to just go for it. Talking about various ways fear or discouragement can manifest itself in our hobby and our hobby endeavors. The fear of messing up is a big one. We've touched on this a little bit already, but I want to go a little bit more into this with you, Paul. You touched on that a little bit with your How Do You Handle Mistakes video.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, could you possibly expound a little bit on what your thoughts are when you hear something like, what if I mess up? Or even better, I think, is I'll build that when I get better.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I always look at every model as just an experiment anyway. For me, I know I see these guys do their magnum opus and then they're out of modeling for a year to recuperate from all the stress.
Been there,
done that. The best thing that I'm already planning the next project. I'm more gassed when I'm all through. It's done. It's on the shelf. I don't care. I'm not going to look at it. I've been thinking about this other thing for 3 months, and that's what I want to get into. So I don't need to take a pause for the magnum opus because I'm already raring to go on something new that I thought about and that I've probably worked into one of my ceiling hangers or something else. And I want to use that concept in the next model. So I don't worry about mistakes. Now I want to go fix them. We're all OCD. There's no way I'm going to let certain things go. But I like on this P38 on this J that I'm putting, I got fed up with it. I'm telling you that last night or whatever, yesterday, I started just putting the pieces together. The booms went on, the wingtips and the ailerons went on, and I could see, the wingtips didn't fit worth baloney the way they put the sprue points in where you couldn't clean up that and keep the locating device. So it all just got wiped away, stick them on there. And then now the parting line looked more even and correct. And I figured, you know what? There's so many moving parts on this P38. I'm going to come in tomorrow and I'm going to look at this and I'm not going to see any problems. There's going to be nothing on here that I care about. I mean, because I'm going to look at it and I'm going to scope it out and there's going to be nothing that's going to stand out. And sure shooting, I learned my lesson. I looked at it this morning or whatever, this afternoon, I'm turning it all around. I'm going, what? I don't see anything. Looks fine.
This works.
So I don't ever worry about mistakes. Now, here's a problem that I came up with the other day. And I listen to these people when they're on like a podcast or whatever, because we hear the vocal side of it. And they'll throw something out as, well, it's just a given. It's just a given that we all want to do it perfectly. Well, are you kidding me? Think about what you're doing. Think about what the definition of perfect is. That means it can't get any better. Are you really want to get to the end of your journey? Do you really want to believe that there's perfection and that it can't go any further? There's always going to be something better. And the way I got into it, and I'm going to use my coffee stuff again, because I love coffee's like it is my passion. Coffee to me in the morning can either be a distraction or it can be a wonderful experience. I drink so much coffee, it's blasphemy, but I'm not going to make a V60 pour over and I'm not making espresso because I'm drinking too much coffee. So I've learned how to do filter coffee, and people, they won't even want espresso anymore. They don't want a V60. They don't want to throw cream in their coffee. They don't believe you can make it taste like that, but it doesn't happen all the time. So when you make a pot of coffee, I call it pastry coffee. It's time to go get something to go with it because it's out of this
Right.
world. And then there's other times where I'm like out and I'm readjusting the grind size or something. I'm going, what's going on here? It can't be right. So what I realized is some days it's going to be good and some days it's not going to be so good. And what it is what it is. I'm not going to worry about it. It doesn't have to be perfect all the time because if it was, it wouldn't get any better. So the solution is really in the definition of perfect, which means it's the end of the journey. So I've given that up. It's never going to be perfect. So just go with it. What it is that day, it is. Come back. If you make a mistake on something, I know from my own thing, it could sit for a couple of days and I will think at another time, I will go, I should have done this right from the beginning this way. I went down the wrong path from the start. Or wait a minute. It's this, I get it. I can fix this in 2 seconds. But when I was in the middle of it, grumbling about how I screwed it up, I couldn't see it. But when I think about it for a while, the solution comes to me. Or I may decide that it's really not a problem anyway. I look at it and I go, with a little touch up here, it's going to be fine. The important thing is this, and I've accomplished that. I don't need to have that there. And it's not just an excuse for not doing it. It's that maybe I was getting sidetracked trying to do something because like my magnification thing, maybe because I was looking at 4 times magnification and it's something that I'm never going to see. So why? Why make yourself crazy over some little imperfection that you will never see? And I can sleep with that. I can lay right down next to it and go to sleep. I think that's a constructive way to look at it. I hate if you get buried into, I get people right when I did the making mistake and they'll go, well, the minute I make a mistake, I just throw it away. I have to start it over. It has to be perfect start to finish. I can't say. It's very few times when that's ever happened to me where there's not been something that's gone wrong. Or the closest thing that ever happened to me was building that clipper. There was problems to solve along the way. I never painted myself into a corner, but I was in a zone where I knew I would solve the problems as I got to it. And I never really put a foot wrong. There was never anything that had to be made over again. It just happened. And the problems that I was in such a place to where the solutions I was just able to vision the solutions as I went along. So that may not have a lot of detail in it, but that is probably the most satisfying model I've ever built just because it went to plan. It went start to finish and the image was what I thought it was going to be. And there was nothing in it that, like that PBY, I repainted that airplane 3 times. The blue, before I realized that it's blue-gray. It's not gray-blue, and I see so many of the early war blues, and they look a little too blue to me. And I made the creative decision that it needed to be a little bit more gray before I was happy with it. But I shot that thing 3 times, and that's a lot of airplane to shoot. It was a pretty good sized thing. And to say, nope, I don't like it. I'm going to take a scuff pad, go over it, knock it down because it was flocal, so it wasn't perfectly smooth. Paint it again till the color looked right. But it didn't happen with that. With the clipper, I had a bunch of this all-clad that was sent to me by the guy that owned the company at the time. He wanted me to build a model and put it in the magazines. And I really didn't have a use for it. It's hard as a rock and it's scribed really well. So I used up his stuff and I painted, and it just worked. I shot a sample, it worked, did the whole thing. I didn't make one boob in scribing that model. And I would come in the evening, I would start laying out the lines and scribing, and I couldn't wait to get back to it the next day. And when it was finished, it was like, I want to keep going because I was in a zone. I couldn't believe that there was nothing to fix. I'm still when I look at that, I go, I don't believe I did it. I don't know if I could do it again, but you were in that zone.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a feeling. I've had it too, to take satisfaction in or fear because I've had a project where, again, I mentioned again, I look back now and it's the thing is,
It's almost a 20-year-old build at this point. How the hell did I do that? What was I thinking? Where did I learn to do that? Can I do it again? I don't know, because I don't remember how I did it.
And that's a lack of fear. And that's why you see a lot of young modelers come along who start producing stuff that many older modelers don't produce. And it's because these younger modelers don't know that they're not supposed to be able to do it. There's no fear to it. And they're like, oh, I need to do this, so I'm going to do it. And that's a wonderful quality.
Yeah, I draw a lot of parallels between some musical stuff because of my background in music. But there is something also to this, we were talking about detail and I said, I don't know if I need to put all that detail in. When you're learning, when you first start doing music, it's really common. And I know I had a guy we probably spent a year working at this hotel the airport hotel, which was a big deal in where I come from. It was one of the better lounges. And a lot of the acts would come through where they'd fly in an airplane, and you might see some of the guys in the bar and everything, and you'd get talking. And I know, because when you're young, you have to prove yourself. You want to make sure everybody knows you have the chops. And so what you're doing may not be that musical, but you're going to be more technical. And I know had this guy was the Isley Brothers, one of the guys in the band, was in the bar. And he said, I get it. I know what you're doing. And you knew who I was when I was there. And I got, you called my bluff. I'm throwing in a bunch of stuff. I'm doing things that weren't necessarily musical, but I'm proven that I can do it. And as you go along, as I've been working longer and longer, I had players that would come in and they'd go, you used to throw in all this stuff. We never know what you were going to do. It was like Buddy Rich. And I said, but it wasn't musical. You mature. You learn what's necessary to create the music, to work with everything else. So when I think about leaving out detail, I'm thinking about boiling it down to the essence. And there's he's probably the musician that I admire the most, was a jazz guy named Bill Evans. And there's some quotes that have been surfacing on the internet. And here's some of this stuff. So I'll throw this out. It's better to do something simple, which is real. It can still be satisfactory, but it's something you can build on because you know what you're doing. Whereas if you try to approximate something which is very advanced and you don't know what you're doing, you can't advance on that. You can't build on it. The simple things, the essence, are the great things, but our way of expressing them can be incredibly complex. It's the same thing with technique in music. You try to express a simple emotion, love, excitement, sadness, and often your technique gets in the way. It becomes an end in itself when it should really only be the funnel through which your feelings and ideas are communicated. The great artist gets right to the heart of the matter. And I think about that when I'm cutting it down to the bare essentials and expressing the individual emotion. So it's good to have those techniques at your hand that you can advance quickly, but you also don't want to copy what everybody else. I don't think you can, to an extent, but at a certain point you want to make your own. Or there's another quote that he has about it. People want to create their own style sometimes. And he says, style's the hardest thing to get. And it's not something you really strive for. And he's talking about Miles because he spent a lot of time working with Miles Davis. I'm sure that Miles never really strived to be a stylist. He just strived to be himself, to learn to develop and to express a strong, independent personality. And in the end, it had its identity. That's why he's a stylist. But somebody might say, wow, I could be a stylist. I'll just do reaching out for being strange or reaching out and being different or novel. And of course, that's a mistake. And that's what it is. I want to do something different than everybody else, but you're not building on any solid foundation. So what you're doing doesn't come off very sincere. It comes off as something that's just sort of contrived. And when I realized this surfaced a little bit in a comment I heard a modeler make on a forum board, one of the Facebook groups. And I'd used that, and I know Will didn't like it when I said that I saw 3D models and they didn't have a soul. And that, I know that hurt his feelings. But what I'm getting at is, for me, the more input I can do manually and get closer to the energy of creation, and the more individual I can keep it, the more of my soul, the soul of a model comes from the person who built it. When I look at a painting or something, I'm thinking about the guy that did the painting. I'm looking at the piece, but even a model that somebody else builds, I'm thinking about who's the guy that would create this. And if it just looks like the same thing over and over again, I don't have that motivation to think so much about who built it. It's more like, I've seen this before. When something catches my eye or it's on the contest table and it's different, I'm kind of wondering, who's that guy? Why would he think that? What would make him do that? What sort of personality? What sort of background? What's his perspective that would allow him to create that? I go right to that. When I look at a magazine article and I see something that I would look at the author. I can't tell you all the people that don't even look at the author's name when they look at a magazine article. They don't care. It's just, oh yeah, I've seen that. Well, who did it? I don't know. It's just some anonymous name in a magazine. They didn't look. First thing, I'll go down the table of contents. Oh yeah, I'm interested in seeing what this guy did. It's going to be something interesting. So that human element that you bring into the model is what creates the soul. So somebody put up a picture of they did a model and it didn't have the right amount of weathering on it. Some people thought it should have more. And one of the responses, well, it has no soul. Well, I'm going to say just because you slathered on a bunch of weathering doesn't give the model soul. How do you know what that guy wanted to create? I don't know what was in his head, but what I'm looking at is an expression of his individuality. Now, that's what gives the model soul to me, or what gives any piece soul, is what human input went into that piece. It's at a different jumping off point than necessarily the finished product. And it's nebulous. You can't always climb into the creator's thought process, but you can sense it. If you're in touch with that energy, I think people have a sensation of what's right and what's wrong by the emotions that they have. If it doesn't feel right to you, if you're uneasy with it, if it's not comfortable for you to do that particular step in the modeling, it's telling you that's not right for you. If you can go from start to finish on a model and you feel comfortable about what you did, you are probably in that zone and what you get out of it, whether it may not appeal to somebody else, it will be a reflection of you. And that's what gives the piece soul. That's what is exciting. It makes the hair stand up on the back of your head when you see that, and on your neck, rather. I would like to see people revel in that rather than 5 people jump in and they say, well, it should be this way, it should be this way. I mean, yeah, you can put it up and ask for advice, but I love it when people are encouraged to, yeah, that's good. It's something different. I appreciate that. I would like to see that come to fore. And it's a little bit hard, again, when you've got a lot of input and people want to do it all the same. You know, I did this, and again, I come up with these weird ideas. I did this M48 tank, and in the beginning, I had a vision. I really didn't, it was a project. I was partly, everybody was crabbing about that the Tamiya M48 didn't look like an M48 and the turret was misshapen. And I thought, well, could we correct it? Is it really misshaped? Whatever. So I looked at it and I was plotting against Honeycutt's drawings, and it turned out that actually Monogram wasn't that far off, at least what I could do when I superimposed over it. But part of what I was doing is I wanted to see if I could create and finish this tank so that it would something that I've always couldn't quite figure out how it was done, were the drawings in a tech manual. They're not really photographs and they're not really drawing. what are they? Well, they're heavily retouched photographs is what they are. And when I got an old Pache airbrush book that had step-by-step of how that process is done. And then I understood how they create those technical drawings. Well, one of the other things that I had in the back of my head is I want to create a museum tank. So I want it to be finished, where it's a semi-gloss finish. But I had in the back of my head that, when you walk into a tank museum, you got the smell of oil, diesel. It's a characteristic smell when you're in that environment. And the pieces are clean, but they're not like, there's dust. It just happens. Dust in places where not everybody's going to clean. Dust in places that are not really accessible. So I shot the thing in a base coat of earth. And I went back in a specific way with the final color so that I could preserve some of that dust in the nooks and crannies. I was so proud that in the muzzle brake, there was a little bit of dust. And I thought, well, nobody's going to climb up there and clean out that muzzle brake. Maybe once a year they might do it. And I thought, this is really cool. Somebody spotted that and they say, well, you missed painting that. And I go, well, I wasn't going to ride in and I just let it go. But to myself, I'm going, that was something that was so different that people weren't used to. The idea was so different that it didn't register. It wasn't on their radar. And even though I lined it out, what I was doing was to try to create a museum tank. And they didn't put it together that I'd kind of gone the extra step further to create museum dust. So you do what you want to do to make yourself happy. And I don't care whether the guy didn't get it or not. I was happy with the result. And when I took the pictures, when I turned them into grayscale, they mimicked what I wanted. They looked like a tech manual touch-up sort of thing. So I was happy with what I was doing. Did it appeal to everyone? Probably not. I figure with my bona fides, I can do that. And I would encourage other people to do that too. If to say, Budzik does that, he doesn't care. I'm going to do something and I don't care what other people think about it because it's what I want to do. If I could inspire people to say that, then I've done my job. That's all I wanted. That's what the point of this is. I'm not looking to, it's not an ego thing for me. I'm not trying to wow you with what I can do with a lathe or anything else. If it seems commonplace to me, I don't mean to brush it off as that. It's just that I grew up making things, making my own tool bits, modifying tools, whatever. It's just what old guys do. That's what we do. I don't need a special engraving tool. I'll grab something else and make it into one. And people go, oh, it's such an exotic thing. No, you take a stone and you work it down to where the tool works the way you want it to, carves the plastic the way you want it to, and then make sure you don't pick it up and do something wrong with it or drop it on the floor that you have to do it all over again. Because it took you 45 minutes to make it work right. So.
Well, Paul, I think those last few comments about really just doing it for yourself is a great thing. And a lot of us get lost in doing it for other people. And I think that's a good point. That's a good point. I think a lot of people could benefit from embracing it a little bit harder.
Yep.
It's probably a good place to end this, actually. We've been about an hour and 22 minutes. And Paul, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It really means a lot to me. You've been an inspiration in my modeling journey, and I appreciate all the content you've created over the going on 40 years now. It's really helped shape my own path. It's kept me encouraged to try new things, and it keeps my wallet hurting buying all these really cool tools. But that's part of it, learning to use them and applying them to my own craft the way I want to.
I appreciate that so much. So thank you. And if that has done that, then I've done what I wanted to do. It's to just keep that energy going in our model building so that it doesn't get lost in the process. I'd like to keep that energy. It can take different forms, but that creative energy and that getting in touch with what you're comfortable with, I think was what will keep it going, and impart that to the young people that are coming into it, that it isn't lost in a more amorphous digitized world. It's more individual, and there's emotion involved in it. It's a guide into how you're feeling. When your health suffers, like if you're a perfectionist, you're going to shorten your lifespan. There's no doubt about it. You just have to be comfortable with what you are and what you're doing.
Well, you'll have to promise to come back.
I would love it. And if nothing else, just to be the old cranky old guy.
Oh, you're not too cranky.
No, you're not too cranky. And as far as old, you're not unusually aged.
Paul, again, it's been a real joy having you on. I've been a big fan of yours for a long time, and you've been great to have you here and talk about a lot of the things that don't get talked about in scale modeling a lot of the time, especially on these podcasts. I think we've touched some interesting ground here. A lot of it's philosophical, but you and Dave and I and some of our other friends in the hobby are I won't say we're old. We may be a little aged, and maybe some wisdom comes with that. And it's just a lot of fun talking about these things and getting back to the essence of why we're even doing this. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's been my joy to be here, and I don't miss you guys because you're contributing to my experience these days, because I never miss one of your shows. Always looking out for when it's coming on. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow, Dave.
Yep. Just wow. I understand. Again, somebody that you've been reading articles from in fine scale from back when fine scale was mind-blowingly new.
Yeah. Along with all the stuff he was showing us.
Oh, yeah.
To us anyway. It's interesting that the connection there with Bob Hayden coming from the model railroading side and wanting to propagate these techniques, which were already established there to a large degree, into static scale modeling.
Yes, in fact, I hope Paul will come back. I would love to have a conversation, just because we've had several guests where we've talked to them and they've talked about their model railroading influence in either bringing them into the hobby or altering what they do in the hobby. And again, with his experience from that, from the beginning, I'd really love to have a deep conversation on the overlap, the influence, etc.
Well, that topic and is at least 18 others we could go down.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Well, we'll see if we can't get him back on here.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, we're at the Benchtop Halftime Report, and the Benchtop Halftime Report is brought to us by Squadron Hobbies. Squadron Hobbies is back in business, folks, and has been for a little while now, and we are nurturing a new partnership with those guys, and we'll have more details on that going forward, and really look forward to that relationship. Well, Dave, what's on your bench?
Pretty much things that have been on my bench, but there is a little bit of progress. Now, my progress was slowed from the standpoint that I was waiting for a hobby supply order from VMS, which finally came in. But in the meantime, I've been making progress on the landing craft, doing some pin washing on the LCM3. That's just about done. And speaking of dry brushing from earlier, I'm going to try a dry brushing technique to follow up the pin washing. Then there's some chipping and rust streaking and stuff like that. And then once that's all done, it's going to be, I'm going to try and use the stencil cutter, cut a stencil for the little markings that are on the thing, and then hit it with a final coat, and hopefully that's going to be done. I mean, I can see the finish line from here. I've just got to get across it. Now that I've got the model supplies came in from Central Europe, able to move forward on some other projects. Particularly, I needed some metal prep from some VMS metal prep, because I have a number of metal parts that I wanted to prime, and I wanted to try this stuff out. And so that's going to move forward too. And then the other project, the F8 has not moved forward from the decaling stage on the fuselage. I need a day, an uninterrupted day where I can just get that done. And I've got to find a way to carve out that time.
Well, you could finish 2 up in like real short order.
That's right. I could. I mean, it is possible by Heritage Con that I'll have a bunch of stuff. So we'll see. We'll see. How about your benchtop?
Not much progress over the last couple of weeks. Not sure why. Probably just, well, there's a lot of distractions. We won't get into that.
Well, okay. Let's at least give credit where credit is due. You had to get stuff packed so it could go up in space. I mean, that's
the work.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that did cut into this last weekend. The rockets wait for no one.
Yeah, that's right.
So
that truck has to leave on time.
Truck left today on Monday at 30 minutes ahead of schedule. I'm getting good at this, Dave.
All right. Well, other than the fact that you had to work all weekend.
Yeah, the net is I've probably logged 14 hours over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just glad I'm working for a company that's even a remote possibility in my mind. It's actually not so bad. I don't mind doing it because it doesn't happen that often.
Right.
But that's just part of it. You know, there was car issues and transportation issues and just stuff, life stuff. Let's not get into all that. That's just life crap. And hopefully a lot of that's behind us now. But the net was only got to touch a few things over the weekend and over the last couple of weeks. And all that traction has been on one subject. It's been on the E-16 float plane.
Which I really cannot wait to see you take the next step. Because you've done something really interesting with the pre-shading and pre-paneling prior to putting on the top and bottom colors for the model. And I'll be interested to see how that technique, how strong it comes through.
Yeah, I'm that's why I want to get the new lights in the spray booth, because that Imperial Japanese Navy green from Tamiya.
Yes.
That is a stinking dark color.
Yes. It's dark, it's opaque, and given what you're trying to do, you're going to want to put it on super thin and build it up. But man, the possibilities given what you've done, I really can't wait to see them.
Well, minus the red, it starting, and I made the joke on the dojo. It's looking like the Partridge Family bus.
Yes.
You know, for a while there, I was masking those panels, and I was like, you know, this is a drag. It really doesn't matter because the panels are all cut in along the panel lines with black anyway.
Exactly.
So let's just thin this out, tune up the Infinity, and just freehand it.
Yep.
And
you can do that with that Infinity quite easily.
Yeah, that worked out fine. It really sped things up.
Yep.
You know, I felt all meticulous and technical when I was doing the masking, but it's like, man, this is going to take a week just to do this. I think I could do this in an afternoon or two, and I did. It's last weekend I did most of that work. But it's still, I'm going to have to build these colors up slow. What I've done is, you know, I did the real garish white and black shading, and then I came back and was using like Tamiya clears to saturate the some of the panels and the control surfaces with blues and yellows and browns, whatever I can mix up from the Tamiya clear line.
Right. And
it's interesting. And you're right. I don't know. This could end up being a colossal waste of time, but I hope not. I think it'll be okay if I take my time and really thin out that the green, the gray, the underside. I'm not too concerned about. I think that one's I can make that effect be as strong or as light as I want it to be.
But that's the underside. Nobody's going to see that.
Well, it's up on a catapult, up on about a 4-inch tall tower. So if there's ever an underside to see without a mirror under it,
that's the one.
That's where we're at. I tell you, I wish I had another paint mule, and I may build one up, because that Japanese navy green is not, I don't know how to say it. It's not a real exotic color. It's a pretty basic color.
Yes.
That's a bad way to frame it, but maybe you understand.
I know what you're trying to say.
I'm wondering how close I could get to that color using Tamiya clear blue and clear yellow. I'm not going to do it on this project, But I'm just curious if I really had transparent paints, how this would go.
Yeah.
And then once it went, say it went okay, what happens after it gets satin finished or flat finished? What's that do to it?
Well, you know what? As our friend Steve Hustad said, spend half your model time testing and practicing.
So one thing I did try to blend that Japanese navy green. I think it's XF12 is the color.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken. With a high percentage of Tamiya clear gloss. That won't work very well. The stuff just falls out of a solution really quick. Yeah. And I could send it up to space and do it in microgravity. That might work.
Well, if anyone had an end to do it, you would. I kind of wonder what airbrushing and microgravity would look like.
I don't know. Submit a grant and we'll figure it out.
Sounds good. Maybe I can get some backing from Harder and Steenbeck.
Yeah, maybe. It's, right now it looks, the model looks really, I don't know, interesting. Let's say that. And all the undercoating that we've talked about is done. I've even gone back and picked out some, like the little round access panels that are everywhere and the little square. I'll pick those out in like almost a white, a real light gray on the underside. And then on the top side, they're kind of a real garish green that I hope is going to show through the top coat.
Yep.
Anyway, we'll see what happens. Stay tuned, folks. At this point, though, it's almost time to cement the canopy on. And I've got some detail painting, which I was working on before we started recording. The circular antenna, the radio antenna. I guess it's the long range antenna.
Yep.
Possibly. I don't know. I don't know much about this stuff. It's the one's a hoop.
Yeah.
And the rear gun. That's what I'm working on now because the antenna has to go on before the canopy. The gun, not so much. I can get to that with the rear section on it with no trouble. The next concern, once I have that cemented on, is the best way to mask that open section because the forward facing end of the rear section and the rear facing end of the forward section are wide open. So I'm going to have to tape those off somehow. And I'm probably going to have to touch up those end frames with a brush after all said and done. Yeah.
No, there's always a little bit of that.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
No new progress on the KV85. Musaru is kind of waiting on some of the stuff you got from VMS.
Well, I've got it. Just come get it.
Yeah, I'll have to come get it somehow. That's my bench, man. I'm getting really eager. We talked about too much Mojo. I've got to hedge against rushing this E16 because I really want to get it done.
Yeah.
Part of me wants it off the bench, but part of me wants to get to this base painting soon so I can just do it and see how it's going to go. Because this is one of those things you think about while you're trying to go to sleep at night, right?
Exactly.
You're laying there thinking this through and how much do I want to thin it? Is it going to go down the way I want? Is it going to be too opaque from the get-go? What's going to happen?
That's that classic meme you see on Twitter of the man and woman laying in bed next to each other, and she's all mad looking, going, I bet he's thinking about other women. And the guy is always sitting there thinking about something else.
Yeah, vanilla ice cream or something.
Right. But in your case, it's, I wonder if this technique will work on that model.
Oh, well, another thing that, I haven't built an airplane in a long time. 40 years, probably.
So just getting one done is going to be an accomplishment.
Yeah, but
no matter how it comes.
Why'd I pick a float plane?
Because you love float planes unreservedly.
Apparently so.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a handling and access challenge.
Yep.
Yeah. That's it, man. That's all I got.
All right. Well, Mike, it's a new year. And of course, the new year always brings model companies new announcements. And we haven't talked about faves and yawns in a while. So what have you seen out there that you've been interested in? And what have you seen out there and gone, what in the Lord's name are they thinking?
We're at the front end. The hobby shows will start rolling out. There's like one a quarter now.
Right.
through the end of the year. But correct, there's a lot that gets announced in January. Airfix, ICM, MiniArt.
Yep.
Several companies have put out their catalogs for the new year. But in my primary genre, 35th scale armor, I'm going to lead off this discussion with a collective yawn.
Okay.
135th modeling New Year is off to a slow start, in my opinion. There's some interesting things out there that will get to my phase, but I'm going to say collectively not impressed. I think it's a collective yawn for what's been announced so far. Though I've got some faves in there, but what's your first thing, Dave? Since mine's a collective yawn.
The first thing isn't 100%. Well, it's unclear whether it's 100% new kit or re-release or re-release upgrade, but it's something that I am happy to see coming back into availability. And that is the 72nd scale DUKW amphibious truck by Italeri. Italeri has made this kit before. And again, like I said, it's a little unclear as to whether this is a new mold or an improved mold or just a straight re-release. But this kit was a little bit hard to come by, and one that really does fill a hole that's out there. So I've got to say, I'm happy to see it coming back into the Italeri catalog, even if I know that Italeri is going to charge an arm and a leg for it.
Well, and you got to watch, like on ScaleMates, when they put that new molds moniker on their box art. Because wasn't it a couple of years ago they released the this Simavente M41, the kit that's been in their lineup since the mid 70s.
Right.
And they re-released this kit and it says new molds. Well,
and didn't they, what they did was they did like a new running gear or something?
Yeah, there was a partial. So it wasn't a whole new tool from the ground up. It was a sort of an add-on.
Right. Well, and that's maybe we don't know with Italeri making this announcement we're just going to have to wait and see.
Funny you mentioned Italeri because that's my first one as well.
Okay.
Of actual single subject releases. And it's a Simavente, the M43, the 105/25 Basotto. It's a...
How do you say stug in Italian?
El Stughe.
Il Stughe. Okay. Because that's what this thing is, right?
Pretty much. It's an assault gun, fixed casemate kind of deal. It's I think they probably leveraged their Caro Armato P43 that they released a few years back. Mm-hmm. I think this is the assault gun based on that, I'll say, quote unquote, heavy tank, because even the heaviest of Italian tanks were not
right
like the rest of the world at war there, except maybe Japan.
Right.
I don't know. It's an interesting vehicle. It was designed and they started production before the 43 armistice, but the lion's share of these vehicles were completed and used by the Germans.
Right.
So I don't know. Some people might think it's a little less sexy because of that.
But then again, this has never been done before, right? So at least it is a new kit of something that was actually used, not a paper panzer.
Yeah, not a World of Tanks subject.
Right. And, it fills a hole.
It does.
And I'm sure there's some Italian armor fanatic out there who saw this announcement and went, yes, finally. Or however you say that in Italian.
What you got next?
Next, this is a fave. And yet I'm going to admit I'm going to buy this kit and never build it. Airfix announced for 2024 they are releasing a brand new Chinook HC-1 helicopter. This is, of course, the classic U.S. Chinook helicopter. The British use it and used it I think they used it in the Falklands and in Afghanistan. So the British Army has gotten a lot of use out of these things. I can see where Airfix releasing this is going to be very popular for the home market, because I'm sure there are a lot of veterans who at one time or another have been in one of these things. It's also used by a bunch of other armies and air forces.
Yeah, it's standard heavy lifter, man.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I've come to the realization that the odds of me actually building any helicopter kit are probably low and getting lower as my lifespan decreases and my desire to build faster increases. But this is a great choice, and I'm sure they're going to do a good job, and I'm sure I'm going to buy it, and the odds are I'll probably never build it, but
it's probably
we'll
almost
see.
a foot long in 72nd scale.
Oh yeah, that is not a small helicopter, especially if you take the rotor diameters into account.
Yeah, because I've got I can't remember which helicopter it is. It's Sikorsky. It's a Sea King.
Yeah,
the one they use for the Apollo missions.
right. The SH-3.
SH-3, and that thing's probably 10 inches long in 72nd scale.
Yep, and the Chinook's significantly bigger. So I'm happy to see it. It was a good choice. It wasn't what I wanted from Airfix for 2024, but again,
somebody did.
Somebody did, and I can't crap on that. It's good choice, good model. I'm sure they'll do fine. Next.
My next one's from ICM.
Okay.
Their Burma Jeep. Now, I got to be honest, this is a vehicle I did not know much about. But after I took the time to look when I saw this announcement, I'm kind of surprised it's never been kitted before.
I agree.
They built 15,000 of these. Ford built 15,000 of these things between 1943 and the end of the war.
Yep.
And most of them went to the Pacific Theater, the Burma Road. That's why I guess the name Burma Jeep.
Right.
That's an interesting low profile, squat, wide wheelbase or wheel track width vehicle. And it's kind of neat. I wonder how that would pair with that Marine Corps version of that, 155 millimeter howitzer that,
the pack howitzer.
No, who makes it? Is it a TACOM kit? There's a World War I French version, and there's the Marine Corps with the balloon tires on it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that'd be kind of cool.
That would be. Yeah, it's filling a hole.
I'm surprised even if there's a resin kit of it, it completely went under my radar.
Right.
Now, up until recently, the U.S. part of the Pacific Theater and, the ground war, I don't want to diminish it, but it's just not been an area that I've had a lot of focus on. So possibly it has, I don't know. But now there's at least 2 versions of this thing kitted by ICM this year. So good on them.
I can tell you out there in podcast land, there's some considerable attention podcast-wise now coming to the World War II Pacific Theater. And there's a really great podcast called The Unauthorized History of the Pacific War Podcast. And it is a really, really good, detailed podcast regarding the Pacific War and the battles and many of the lesser known island battles. And it just, I think the Pacific War is coming into a revival, kind of like the 1939 Poland campaign came into a revival a few years ago.
We'll see where it goes. So
yes.
I don't know. This one gets a fave from me. I'm interested in maybe getting this one.
I can see that.
Well, what you got next?
I got a yawn.
All right. Lay it on me, brother.
You sometimes look at an announcement and you're like, what? And again, if somebody out there sees this and is excited about it, I'm not crapping on your parade.
This is all personal opinion, folks.
It's all personal opinion. But Model Collect and Rocket Models have announced jointly that they are releasing the Japanese Army Z-Bomber Midway Counterattack Anti-Ship Guided Missile. And this is a flying wing that
didn't exist,
that they slap a Japanese Hinamaru on it. They put it in Japanese camouflage and stick a German Fritz X bomb under it. And this isn't even a paper panzer. This is as far as I know, this isn't from any anime show or cartoon, or this is just
comic book.
Right. Out of whole cloth. Hey, we've got this mold. Wouldn't it be nice? We can probably get some more use out of it by releasing it in a boxing with this. And okay. Yeah. All right. But yeah, that's going to be a yawn for me.
I won't get you that for Christmas Day.
No, do not get me that for Christmas.
All right. Well, I got one more.
All right.
It's neither. It's a investigate further, wait and see.
Okay.
It's from Hasegawa.
Okay.
A GR 130NL Tondo rough terrain crane in 1/35th scale. Now,
is this like a piece of earth moving equipment?
Well, it's a crane. It's a piece of construction equipment.
Okay.
And after I dug into this a little bit, they've got a handful of these kits in this range now.
Right.
They're 1/35th scale.
Yep.
Construction equipment.
Yep.
Does it interest me at all? No, probably not. But I'm just, a lot of people are a little bit disappointed that Hasegawa seems to have, something's going on, right?
Right.
You've got that third party re-releasing some of their kits with new decals. What are they? Something 2000 or
Hobby
something
2000.
Hobby 2000. Not a lot of new releases from them in any of their, their historic aircraft lines, right?
Right.
But they've got all these construction equipments in 35th scale. For some reason, they've got all those 16th scale Japanese women.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with Hasegawa, but I'm sure these are pretty good kits. I mean, just because, right?
Right.
I don't know. 35th scale? Interesting.
Yep.
Gonna wait and see. Not for me, but I'll wait and see. Got anything else?
Nope, that's it. Well, this is going to be the least surprising modeling fluid wrap up I suspect that we're going to have, because I can report that Gumball Head has not changed suddenly overnight. It is still a really fantastic beer and a great modeling fluid. Definitely worthy of your bench. How about your Knob Creek?
Well, you need to dump that in a glass, man. It'll get even better. I'm promising you.
See, and you're right. I always drink it out of the bottle. Maybe it would open the nose up even more if I drank it out of a Plastic Model Mojo beer glass available at the Plastic Model Mojo merchandise store. How was that for working one in?
Yeah, that was pretty good, Dave.
Thank you.
But what's more, if you can ever find that on draft,
yes.
Yeah, that's sublime at that
point.
Well,
if we go to the MMSI show in Chicago, we're going to go right by there and we'll have to stop and get a draft.
We may have to tell them we're coming.
Yes, we may have to tell them we're coming.
Oh, but back to the Knob Creek.
Yes.
I don't know if surely not all Knob Creek is 9-year, right?
Right, no.
So what I've got is a 9-year Knob Creek. It's 100 proof. It's a Jim Beam product out of Claremont, Kentucky.
Right.
It's not the Russell's Reserve 10-year.
Well, that's okay.
But there's more to it than the age. I think it's a little harsh. It's not bad, but it's not going to displace anything in my staple lineup. Let's just put it that way.
Well, that's okay. It's good to know.
It's not terrible, but it doesn't make you go wow.
Right. In other words, if somebody gave it to you, you drink it, you wouldn't pour it out, but it's not something you're going to go seek out.
No, I don't think this is going to be hot to replenish when this one runs out. So not bad, but if I'm going to get something I like.
Gotcha.
And I wanted to try something different. I'd never had this one. I thought the 9-year was a different bottling, and I think I'm right. There's got to be there's a younger one out there. It's probably like their standard fare. It's got a pretty good flavor. It's just compared to the Russells, it's just not there, man.
Gotcha.
Russell's 10-year beats this one. So folks out there who've been buying that, keep buying it. Don't buy this one. Buy that instead.
Gotcha. Mike, we're toward the end of the episode here. Do you have any shout outs before we wrap it up?
I do. I've got a couple.
Okay.
One of them's the standard fare. We'll get to that one last. But my first shout out is Tom Choi, who I think maybe we shouted out last time.
Yeah, well, we did mention him at least because he had inflicting our podcast on his daughter.
Oh, that's right. That was a listener mail.
Yep.
Well, now he's made it to shout outs.
Okay.
So good on you, Tom. The plastic model Mojo bingo card.
Yes, I love this.
Well, first, let me say in all honesty that I do really appreciate the humor.
Yes.
But to take a different twist on it, possibly it could be interpreted as a passive-aggressive criticism of some things we might ought to consider along our path of a continual improvement, Dave. So we will be having a discussion post-record sometime this week about a couple of the squares on that bingo card and see if we can't make it a little harder for folks to get bingo.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom Choi.
Yes.
Appreciate it. It was funny, but
it was, and I love it.
What you got?
Well, my shout out is to my fellow members of the IPMS USA e-board. We've been working a little harder than normal lately. I'd also like to shout out all of the IPMS members who have reached out to offer to take up volunteer positions to help out in a number of areas where we're needing additional volunteer help. And I'd like to shout out those guys because, again, well, I shouldn't say guys, gals and guys, because we have both. And they're giving of their time that I'm sure every one of them would rather spend modeling to make things like the Madison Nationals happen. So shout out to my fellow e-board members.
Well, my next one is to all those folks out there who support Plastic Model Mojo through their generosity. Folks like, we got an anonymous one this time, Dave.
You make it hard for us to shout you out when it's anonymous, guys.
Mr. Panzer Grenadier has joined us on Patreon, and he must be from the United Kingdom somewhere because the donation came through in pounds sterling. Anyway, we appreciate that very much. If you'd like to help out the show, folks, like Mr. Panzer Grenadier has done via Patreon, we're kind of transitioning the way we deliver this. I'm going to say go to www.plasticmodelmojo.com. Normally, I'd say there's a heart icon in the upper right-hand corner that goes to PayPal, but I'm not going to say that, even though I just did. Open up a recent episode, and in the show notes, you're going to find links to all the avenues available to you to support the show. So there's going to be Patreon, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and also the Plastic Model Mojo merchandise store, which I must say is picking up a little steam. So thanks to all those folks out there who've been buying T-shirts and pint glasses and all that. And send us a pic of you wearing this stuff in the wild. We want to see it.
Yes, absolutely. Or post a picture of it on the dojo.
Got anything else, Dave?
That's it, Mike.
Well, Dave, we're at the end of this. And as we always say,
so many kits.
So little time, my friend. We'll catch you next time.
You got it.
You can get some models done, man.